Some news, Justin. We've received the written testimony from the heads of the FAA, the NTSB and Department of Transportation in the United States, who will testify about Boeing on Wednesday in the Senate. The acting FAA administrator is expected to say its oversight approach needs to evolve. When you think about it, what time did they have on the doomed Lion Air plane? 40 seconds, probably the max. That's how long pilots in simulators are finding they have to save their aircraft if it's a 737 MAX, when recreating the problems investigators believe brought down Lion Air flight 610 last October. According to the New York Times, the pilots had just moments, less than moments, to stop Boeing's software from causing a catastrophic nosedive. Previous reports say the pilots were scouring a manual, trying to understand what had happened and what they needed to do. Nothing that the plane was doing according to anything they'd ever seen before or had been trained for. The plane, of course, plunged into the sea. David Soucie is the former FAA safety inspector. He's in Denver. I read, David, that what supposedly happened and how the pilots in the simulators reacted. But David, Boeing have always maintained that switching off the motor to the stabilizer is the recognized way of dealing with it. So why was it different in this case?
Well, the two things, Richard. One is that the pilots weren't aware that it was even in play, because when you turn off that MCAS system, or when you turn off your autopilot, you think that you're in total control. So the response, the natural response, isn't to think of an electronic thing that you need to turn off. You think that there's something physically wrong with the aircraft, pushing the nose down. So that's where your mindset is. And that indicates to me that there may not have been enough training for the pilots to recognize the difference between the two things.
When this happened, and in listening to it, I mean, it sounds like there was a very short window to identify and work out. Firstly, we're going down, it's the stabilizer. Secondly, I need to do the auto stabilizer trim procedure. How did Boeing get this one so wrong?
Well, Richard, there's a couple of things, a couple of speculations, but one of them is, to me, is just kind of an overconfidence in the fact that they felt that this system was not a primary control system. It was simply designed by the group that says we need to modify the way it flies to make it fly more like the previous version. So they didn't think of it as being a primary flight control issue. And when they first approved it as engineers, they only approved it for about 2% of deflection. But the way that the software interpreted that and the way it came out was that every time you use the trim, it resets itself, allowing it to go past the 2.5 every time you do that. So it could end up at 9.8 degrees of deflection. So I think what happened here, Richard, is not enough communication, not enough understanding among the entire system, not just that one system, but how it affects everything.
And David, the FAA acting administrator is due to say, we believe before Congress, that the reason they didn't ground the fleet is because at that time there was no systemic reason to do so. They could not find a systemic reason. Well, bearing in mind everyone else said abundance of caution, do you think his reasoning holds water?
He's wired to the wrong side, Richard. In that point, he should have been thinking, what reason was there to not ground the aircraft? Not what reason there was to ground it, but what reason is there to keep it flying? And that is a change in philosophy, and it needs to be examined not only by him personally, but by the organization.